we talking about practice. Not a game. We talking about practice.
Now, back to the After Practice podcast with Lake Lewis.
Welcome, everyone, to another After Practice podcast with myself, Lake Lewis. Appreciate you joining me as always. And we've got a busy show. It's been a week of a lot of uncertainties for the Washington Commanders. And now there are certain things that have happened that we're going to discuss. One being the hire of Dan Quinn as their new head coach. And I got to ask you, my friends, do you like the move or don't you like the move? I mean, I think this is something that has kind of galvanized the area right now. It's a lot of water cooler conversations going on in the offices and the schools. And I think the fan base has spoken loudly that I think the majority weren't happy with the decision for Josh Harris, the new owner, and Adam Peters, their new GM, to hire Dan Quinn. But I'm going to break some things down as why I think this could be a good hire. Once the emotions settle down and everything, gets to normalcy, I'm going to talk about why I think Dan Quinn hire is a good one for the Washington Commanders. But before we get into all that, let's do what we always do here. You can follow me on social media at Lake Lewis on X. You can follow me at Lake Lewis Jr. on Instagram and on Facebook. And then, of course, you can go to sportsjourney.com where we've got some great articles. You can see some of the stand-ups I've done, post-game shows for ABC News in DC. Just, again, great articles from the Capitals. There's some Wizard stuff on there. And then, of course, the Washington Commanders in the NFL. Look, we've got some new sponsors that we want to shout out as well. We've got a newbie in the group now, and we're talking about ThermoPack. And ThermoPack is an innovative, revolutionary mouth shield, and it's the leading heat-informed athletic mouth guard that changes colors to warn against potential heat-related injury or illness. For more information, you can go to their website at thermopack.com. We also have the lovely ladies, and, obviously I'm a little biased to this, one of my better halves. She's the owner of Sideline Prep, and if you are a potential pro cheerleader, if that's what you want to do, and you're wondering how to become an NFL or NBA cheerleader, Sideline Prep preps you like a pro. For more information, you can go to their website at sidelineprep.com. And then finally, my good friends over at Chill Skins. That's right, folks. Chill Skins is a customized safety cooling towel and headband, and it's no refrigeration needed. Just put some cold water on it and it'll keep you cool all day. And I'm telling you, this isn't lip service. I've used this all throughout training camp over the last 2 years and got a bunch of my colleagues who cover the Commanders wearing that cooling towel as well. So again, you can go to chillskins.com for more information on that. Look, what a week, folks. I mean, it started off looking like the Washington Commanders were going to have a coup across the board. That they were going to be able to bring in the GM of choice and Adam Peters, which they did. You just felt like everything was on the up and up, that they were going to hire Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, and it didn't happen. Ben Johnson unceremoniously took his name out of the running for coaching jobs on this cycle of coaching opportunities and decided to go back to Detroit. And I think it blindsided everyone. I think it blindsided the fan base who wanted Ben Johnson. I think it, blindsided ownership because I think that they had put, I don't want to say all their eggs in the basket of Ben Johnson because they didn't. Obviously, the gentleman we're going to talk about who's the coach now, they really liked his interview. They liked most of the people that they interviewed, and that's something that I heard from within. But I think Ben Johnson was the first choice. And there's no shame in not getting him because the other candidates are definitely qualified candidates on top of that. But with that said, the runner-up, in my opinion, that I thought the team should have gone after was Mike Macdonald from the Baltimore Ravens. And I just felt like what that man had done with that defense as far as them shutting down the Ben Johnsons when they played Detroit in Week 7. They shut his offense down. Detroit didn't score an offensive touchdown that game. Then you look at what the Ravens did against the Houston Texans in the playoffs, and Bobby Slowick, another guy who has decided to go back to the Texans and stay as their offensive coordinator. But all these brilliant offensive minds were kind of shut down. And then, of course, last Sunday in the AFC Championship game, the Ravens gave up 14 points on the Chiefs opening 2 drives in the first quarter. And then after that, Mike McDonald made some adjustments and they shut down Kansas City's offense, although Patrick Mahomes wasn't controlling that game. That's not for today's show. But I just thought that Mike McDonald might be the guy. Well, he's in Seattle. Seattle didn't let him get off the plane without a contract. So he's in Seattle. So now it puts Washington in a situation of candidates that were out there. Anthony Weaver, who's defensive line coach for the Baltimore Ravens. You had Aaron Glenn, defensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions. And then, of course, you had Dan Quinn, who was the the defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys. And guess what? You look at those guys, and then there were 2 huge figures that were sitting out there still, folks. You had Pete Carroll sitting out there, Super Bowl winning coach for the Seattle Seahawks. And then you had who a lot of people think is the GOAT as far as all of coaching, Bill Belichick, and, the 6 Super Bowls, 9 appearances with the New England Patriots. He was still sitting out there. So it left some stuff still desirable for the Commanders to go out and get. And I think that they hired, as far as on paper, probably the least desirable as far as a name for the fan base. And this is the problem now. Fans have already given up and saying that the new ownership group and the new GM and Peters, they've totally dropped the ball. No, they haven't. One thing I think I'm pretty certain of from what I've seen so far with the new ownership group, as well as Adam Peters, they have a pulse on what they're trying to accomplish and what they're trying to do. And I'm not saying this, no one's told me to say anything positive and spin this, but I'm just saying this. I think that they wanted someone that clearly was a leader of men. And I tweeted out almost 2 weeks ago that whoever they hire, they better get it right in the fact that this man better be a person that can come in and galvanize the locker room and have one unified voice, and his voice being the last one as far as what goes on the field. I think they got that. I think Dan Quinn is that guy. I truly believe that. Dan Quinn is very similar to, say, a Dan Campbell in Detroit, their head coach, who's a rah-rah guy, who's going to love his players up, but he's also going to get in your face when you need it to push you. I think Dan Quinn fits that bill to a T, and I think that that's what Washington has been lacking for the longest time. Let's face it, folks. Ron Rivera, when he came in, he was known as a leader. I wouldn't necessarily throw out the leader of men, but he had leadership qualities. And I think that his leadership qualities were a little different from Dan Quinn's. Ron Rivera's leadership qualities were needed to keep the franchise afloat as they were transitioning, to a new name change, transitioning to new ownership, going through legal issues. That's what Ron Rivera was. And Ron Rivera, to his credit, did an outstanding job in that field, in that department. He brought credibility to the franchise. As far as the X's and O's, totally different. And I will say this, Dan Quinn, in all of his stops, has had some success. You can't say, he struggled down the stretch in Atlanta and his defense was struggling and he got fired there. Yeah, that happened. But there are a lot of coaches on the second go round do much better because they learned from the first time. Well, the first time for Dan Campbell, he took the Falcons to the Super Bowl. So that's not a bad thing, okay? He had an MVP quarterback in Matt Ryan. Is it similar to Ron Rivera? When Ron Rivera was with the Carolina Panthers and Ron Rivera had an MVP candidate and winner in Cam Newton, and they went to the Super Bowl and lost. Same thing with the Falcons. Yes, I understand. I think the difference is that Falcons team that Dan Quinn took to the Super Bowl imploded in the Super Bowl. And that's what people remember. They remember the 28-3 halftime lead. They remember that Tom Brady and Belichick and the Patriots came back, took that game to overtime, and ultimately won it in one of the most epic collapses in NFL history on the grand stage. We get that. But let's talk about Dan Quinn and what he did in Seattle with the Legion of Boom. Their defense was second to none when he was there. They won a Super Bowl, went back the following year and should have repeated, but it wasn't the defense that failed in that game against the Patriots and Tom Brady and Bill Belichick all over again. It was the offense. It was having 4th and goal and you're passing the football on the final play when you should have just turned it around and handed off to Marshawn Lynch, who was unstoppable in that game. So that was a Pete Carroll. That was a Russell Wilson. That was an offense that failed the Seattle Seahawks in a Dan Quinn-led defense. So I think if we look at his body of work as a coordinator, it's impeccable. It truly is. Yes, again, what have you done for me lately? The optics say we just remember Dan Quinn's Dallas Cowboys defense getting roasted, getting ran through, getting taken in the back alley, and God knows what happens back there. That's what it looked like on that Sunday against the Green Bay Packers. The Packers did whatever they wanted with little resistance by that Cowboys defense. However, that defense throughout the year was one of the better units in the NFL. I mean, they were humming, they were running around. They were doing things to the NFC East offenses, which shut things down. I mean, let's face it. What they did to the New York Giants in week 1, that first game, everyone remembers that game. That was just an absolute smothering. They put a blanket over the Giants. Then you think about what they were doing to the Philadelphia Eagles offense. And then naturally, we all remember what they did to Washington on Thanksgiving Day, where the defense had a pick 6. Deron Bland tied the record or broke the record for interceptions in the season and all those things. I mean, they had Washington's offense in jail. Literally, Washington's offense, the guys were holding the bars. They couldn't see out. They were locked up. That's what Dan Quinn's defenses do. So guess what? Let's talk about 3 things here. 3 things that I think are important to remember here. 3 things that you're getting with Dan Quinn, okay? That are really good things for the Commanders. First thing is, again, you're getting leadership. The man is a leader of men. I talked to a former player, 2 days ago, and he literally told me that he talked to Dan Quinn. He's trying to get on his staff, and I'm not going to mince words. It's a friend of mine, Philip Daniels. Bob, let's get this done. Dan Quinn, by the way, Philip's a great coach. Did good things with the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl as their defensive line coach. So with all that said, he said that players love Dan Quinn. He said it. He said they love him. He said they'll run through a wall for him. He has a way of reaching his players where they feel comfortable. They feel like they're not being lied to. And we know that this happens quite a bit in the NFL, not just the NFL, but all of sports, where coaches say one thing, give lip service, and do the other. And that was happening in Washington last year. I can assure you that. So with that being said, these are the type of things that you want in a leader. You want someone that can reach people, that can be upfront and honest with them, assess them in a positive way, but also give them tough love at the same time. And also take their input and value that. And that's the one thing you will keep hearing about Dan Quinn, is that he really values input from his players. And let's face it, if you've played any kind of sport at any level, you know when you're out there, you're seeing things that maybe the coaches don't see at that particular time, that maybe wasn't game planned for. Well, if you can't go back to your coach and say, hey, they're doing it a little different from what we all thought, and that coach doesn't want to take the input, then you're doomed. Well, Dan Quinn will take that input. So that's a great thing from a leadership standpoint. The second thing, look, him coming to Washington and leaving Dallas weakens Dallas. You're talking about the head of their defense, the defensive mind, the guy that put it all together for all those players for Dallas, the Micah Parsons, the Deron Blands, the Diggs, of the world, not Stephon, but Trey Diggs. You think of all these guys that, excelled in his scheme. Well, that was his scheme. So if he's bringing that to Washington, guess what? Washington's defense got better overnight, just because the mind orchestrating it is going to put them in better positions. We all know Dallas's defense struggled against the run. Well, they didn't have the space eaters in the middle. They didn't have the tackles that could stop the run. They didn't. Dallas's defense was predicated on speed and athleticism, and that's great. And that's something that he will bring to Washington, where he wants more athletic players and speed out there. But he's already got 2 monster space eaters and potentially a third in Fedarian Mathis. So if you think about Deron Payne, you think of John Allen, what he walks into, those are true Pro Bowl tackles, folks. And then you have a third that was a third-round draft pick from 2 years ago. So there's depth at that position as well. So now you get better and you weaken a divisional rival. And that's a good thing if you're Washington. So that's two things that are positives for the Washington Commanders head coach and Dan Quinn. The third thing is it's the unknown. No one knows how this is going to turn out. I mean, I could sit here and say, I do this for a living and I know it. No, I don't. No one knows how this is going to turn out. But guess what, folks? Can it get any worse than what it's been? I mean, before you jump off the cliff, before it's Armageddon and the end of the world is coming because they hired Dan Quinn. Think about this. Give the man a chance, because I know what I saw the last 4 years. And I'm not talking about from a coaching standpoint, head coaching standpoint. I'm talking about from a defensive coordinator standpoint. That outfit was always having offenses dictate to them. It wasn't Washington playing downhill. It was Washington playing on their heels. It was the Chase Youngs and the Montez Sweats being asked to put their hand in the dirt in the same spot all the time. On occasion, they flip-flopped them, okay? But then when I look at film and I look at Dallas's defense and I see Micah Parsons lining up everywhere but as a parking lot attendant, literally, that's how well and creative Dan Quinn was with that Dallas defense. He moved guys around. He gave you different looks. That's what I'm excited to see. It's exciting to see that Washington will have a modernized defense for once, okay? It's a shame that you won't get a chance to see Montez Sweat or Chase Young in this defense, because I think it could have been something. It really could have. But coulda, woulda, shoulda. We don't do that. It's over, water over the bridge. But the unknown of Dan Quinn is you have to give him a chance. So a lot of you out there, my friends, I'm just kindly asking, woosah, take a breath. Don't let this thing ruin your week, ruin your weekend. I mean, I've seen some of you on social media and you have been out there in comments. I can just flat out tell you that. We're friends. I love you dearly. But come on, let this thing simmer a little bit. Give it an opportunity. I mean, think about it. This team has the number 2 pick in the draft. They've got 2 second-round picks. They've got, they have 5 picks in the top 100 and 6 picks in the top 106. So things can get right real quick if it's done properly and if it's handled properly. And this is the first time in a long time this franchise, this organization has a GM, and a GM that has a track record of being a really good scout, a really good evaluator of talent. And I also think that there's something that we also have to touch on and be upfront about this. Would you have really felt comfortable? And I know some of the younger fans out there, if you're 35 or under and you watch the show, love you dearly. I know some of you wanted a young coach because that's just the way the game has been going. But this is an organization that's a little different in the fact of what they've gone through, okay? This is an organization that does need leadership. It has to have it. And I think the ownership group, felt really good. The fact that they got the best possible GM candidate. He was number 1, numero uno, recognized around the league as the next young gun to be a great GM, and they got him. Washington has that guy in Adam Peters, okay? But when you think about it, the Ben Johnsons, the Mike McDonalds, the Bobby Slowicks, the Anthony Weavers, the Aaron Glenns, as great as these guys are, and I think they're all phenomenal coaches, none of them have head coaching experience. And I think for Washington in this situation that they're in now, ushering in a whole new regime, I don't know if it would have been in their best interest when you really sit back and think about it. I don't know if it would have been in their best interest to have a brand new coach, a brand new GM, brand new owner, and guess what? All of them be new at this. You can say Josh Harris is not new as an owner. Well, he's new as an NFL owner, without question. He has success as an NBA owner and as an NHL owner. They've never won the big ones in those respective leagues, but they're still good and they're able to do that. The New Jersey Devils are, Stanley Cup contender. The Philadelphia 76ers are an NBA contender, and they have a league MVP in Joel Embiid. But if you think about it, this is his first go-round as far as the NFL. So he needs some people that have been in NFL circles that he can lean on, that he can talk to, that can help him. Adam Peters has been around for years and been part of some great organizations, from his time in Philadelphia, from his time in San Francisco. He's been around in Denver, was around the Super Bowl team there in Denver. He's been around to see it and be around some of the great minds in all of, the NFL. But this is his first go around as the lead guy that, stamps his approval on everything as the GM. So now you look at a guy like Dan Quinn, and Dan Quinn is your coach who's had experience as a head coach that went to a Super Bowl, has experience as a, coordinator of the year, which he was multiple times, with Seattle and Dallas. So that's someone that has experience that can help you. And I think if you put all three of those minds and heads together, you collectively get what you want. You're rowing in the same direction. You're getting the best of every world possible. A new innovative, way of thinking with more of an older school way of thinking, and an owner who's got deep pockets, who is a sports person, though, not a fan, but a sports mind, and a businessman on top of that. So these are good things, I think, for the Commanders, folks. And again, I'm not trying to sell you the Kool-Aid or anything like that. I'm not even drinking Kool-Aid. I drink water out of my hydrate. But the point is, before you write this thing off, before it even started, be excited. Be excited because there's change here. First and foremost, 2 years ago, you wanted Dan Snyder out of there. For 20-something years, people were subjugated to a bad way of business being done for the franchise. So now you have a new dawn of a new era. Everything's in place now. You get a great, hot, GM candidate that everybody wanted. Well, you get him, and now the coach you want may not have that sexy name, and he may not be the young gun, and everyone thinks the sky's falling. Well, you got to stop that. I mean, seriously, you got to stop that. Be positive. Listen, if it fails, then you have every right to say, I told you so, it's terrible. But if it doesn't, hey, things are good. And how many times have we seen the big splashes for the Commanders, or formerly the Redskins? How many times? We saw it with Steve Spurrier, the old ball coach coming from Florida, came to Washington and didn't look like he knew how to coach at all. There's levels to this. He went from Florida doing it to the NFL. No, it's totally different. We saw Mike Shanahan come out of retirement, came in, high expectations. You draft RG3 with the number 2 pick in the draft. They got off to a terrible start that first year, terrible start. And then all of a sudden that team went on a 7-game winning streak, made the playoffs. And then, of course, we know the history of the injury with RG3 and all that stuff. And if you look at that staff, think of the guys that were on that staff, the Sean McVays of the world, the Kyle Shanahans of the world, Matt LaFleur, Raheem Morris. I mean, there were guys scattered across that are in the league right now. Bobby Slowick, they all were part of that staff, and it didn't work. So what I'm saying is, if they had hired one of these young guns, and you may have felt great, you may have felt like, man, we're going in the right direction, but it still was an unknown. They still have to coach their first game as head coaches, which is a lot different from being a coordinator. And I'm saying this because when you're a head coach, you've got to worry about what's going on the defensive game plan. You've got to worry about what's going on the offensive game plan. Hell, you might be calling the offense if you're an offensive mind, or you may be calling the defense like a Dan Quinn if you're a defensive mind. There's more levels to this. And on top of it, the way you're acting as a fan base, think about it. You don't think that it went through their minds that if they bring in a young gun and this young gun struggles off the bat, the venom and vitriol that comes with this fan base at times? Think about that. So you play a part in these decisions too now. Don't think you don't. But you also play a part in showing that you're part of a fan base that's going to be together for once. I mean, it seems like this fan base has always been old versus young. I'm the old guard. I remember the heyday. I remember, Dallas week, the city shutting down. I remember the parades. I'm from DC. For me to be able to come back and cover the team that I cheered for as a kid is just something a lot of people don't get an opportunity to do. And I jumped on it when I had the opportunity. But I can say this fan base is not the fan base that I remember when this team was winning, and rightfully so, because most of that fan base has gone up the road to Baltimore to root for that team. That's what's happened. So in order to be the fan base that we all know and love, and know that you guys can fill that stadium and not have it taken over by opposing, teams, fans, these are the times that all that stuff can be changed. I understand wins change everything. So the unknown is we don't know how it's going to turn out, but let's just stay positive and we'll see if it can be what we all think it could be. And like I said before, the draft capital, the salary cap space, all of these things are conducive and in place right now for Washington to be able to hit the ground running and do something special. You know, if it's me, I'm going all out. I'm calling Chicago and I'm saying to them, hey guys, listen, what do you want for that number 1 pick? Because I want Caleb Williams. I want that. I think that's the biggest storyline in the offseason for this franchise. How do you maneuver to get Caleb Williams and not break the bank? Okay. If you can give up your number 2 pick for Chicago's number 1, give Chicago back one of those second rounders that they traded for Montez Sweat, and then maybe a second next year. You know, hell, if they want to do that, I'm doing that. And I'm drafting Caleb Williams, bringing him back to DC. I'm hitting the ground running. So all these things we're going to be talking about clearly, leading up until the combines coming up at the end of the month. I'll be there, excited about that. And then, of course, you have the NFL draft and you have OTAs, you have rookie mini camps, you have all these things that are going to come up before training camp and preseason come up. So we've got a lot of time to dissect this, but as of now, Washington has their guy. They have their new coach, Dan Quinn, has been around the league, knows the landscape, knows this division inside and out, having had to scout the teams in the division. So he clearly knows the talent level that's on Washington's offense because he's had the game plan against that offense. He clearly knows some of the defensive players on this roster because he had a chance to sit and watch them, playing them twice a year and looking at film. So he's not coming in here totally blindsided, not knowing what he's walking into. He knows the landscape in Washington. So I think that that's a positive. So as always, folks, definitely appreciate you joining me on today's pod. Just wanted to jump on and give you 30 minutes of love. You know, it's all love with me. Remember, you can follow me on social media at Lake Lewis on X, formerly known as Twitter. And then, of course, at Lake Lewis Jr. on Instagram and Facebook. And then you can go to sportsjourney.com where you can watch this. You can subscribe to this in audio form with Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Spreaker, iHeartRadio. It's on there. So, again, folks, appreciate the love and all the support out there. And I'm trying to give it back to you. I know this is a kind of a broken fan base and a fan base that's just been downtrodden for a long time, and rightfully so. But it's time to raise up now and be positive for once, and just until we have a reason not to be, let's stay positive and hopefully this thing can turn around and you guys can come out as fans and watch some good football and I can cover some good football as a journalist. So appreciate you. Have a good one.